Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Aina and I am an oncology pharmacist. NileRed makes insane chemistry videos and I watched some of them recently and I found out that he's been running his little pharmaceutical company at home, making drugs from batteries or extracting drugs from lube. If you haven't checked out that video yet, you can watch it here and come back to this later. But apparently, I missed some even more unhinged experiments where he makes even stronger drugs like hypnotics, sedatives, and drugs from his own urine. So let's watch them for the first time and share my reaction as a pharmacist with you guys.
For a long time now, I've been kind of fascinated by bath salts. At least here in Montreal, the most common one is Epsom salt, and this is specifically the one that I'm interested in. In stores, they sell it in huge bags or containers, and it's usually just a bunch of white crystals.
We actually recommend Epsom salt a lot for things like mild muscle and joint pains, to something called a sitz bath, which is made by adding Epsom salt to some warm water in a shallow bath, and you would sit in it, and the purpose is to reduce pain and swelling in either the vaginal or the anal area. Trust me, it's a thing.
What has always kind of blown my mind is that despite being completely dry, a huge portion of it is actually water. In fact, it's not even just a huge portion, and it's technically mostly water at around 53% by weight. This is why the proper chemical name for Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate heptahydrate, where hydrate is referring to water. The core compound is magnesium sulfate, but it has 7 water molecules that are chemically bound to it.
So what you're saying is, all this time I've just been selling water? Apparently the reason why it's called Epsom salt is because it's first discovered in Epsom, England. They found these like natural crystal formations, and then I guess people thought it's a good idea to use them to take bath.
In this form, the water's no longer a liquid, and it's part of the solid crystal structure. What I've always found really interesting though, is that this water is only loosely bound. With just a bit of heating, the bonds should break, and the water should fall off.
You know, I've never actually tried Epsom salt myself, so I've decided to go out and buy it and try it today. I think I've even have the same brand that NileRed has bought. Directions: dissolve 500 grams in a bath of hot water. So this bag is 2 kilograms. 500 grams is about a fourth of the bag. Let's see how well this dissolves. Oh wow, it's pretty much dissolved already. So I'm gonna try that and report back at the end of the video.
To get this whole thing started, I pulled out the biggest flask that I had, and I filled it with as much Epsom salt as I could. When it looked pretty full, I took it off the stand and I dropped it into a big heating mantle. Now in theory, I was good to go, and I turned on the heating.
So from what he described, all this experiment needs is just to heat this up and the water will release by itself.
At first, it didn't really seem like much was happening. The water was only supposed to start coming off at around 150 C, and it was going to take a while for it all to heat up. After about 10 minutes, I noticed that the salt had sunk down a bit, which told me that something was happening. What was much more exciting though, was the small amount of water that had condensed at the top of the flask.
Oh yeah, you can totally see the layer of condensation against the flask. That's cool.
However, barely a few minutes later, a small hole opened up in the corner, and I saw some boiling water. So apparently, there was a lot more water than I thought.
Wow, there's actually enough water in there to boil.
When there was eventually enough, it was able to make it out of the condenser, and I got my first drop of beautiful bath salt water.
Bath salt water, oh my god. When he collects water like that, it makes it feel like the water is super precious. It's like that scene in Dune where the Fremens collect every single last drop of water from the dead bodies. It just makes you not want to waste anything, you know?
The next day, I took out all the pieces, and I poked at the magnesium sulfate.
Whoa.
I was expecting it to be tough and probably hard to break apart, but I was hoping that it wouldn't be too bad. However, what I had here felt like a block of cement. So the first step was to get it out of this one.
Oh, what is he gonna do? Oh, he's just gonna break it.
It was apparently even stronger than I thought, and to destroy it, I was gonna have to use a bit more force.
Oh my god. I feel like you can see his table like move up and down when he hits the ball of magnesium sulfate. This is insane.
So I went online and I found a random comment that said an electric food grinder worked well for chalk.
Okay. Oh.
At first, it actually seemed like it was working, but it quickly stopped doing much of anything. I was gonna have to use something a little more heavy duty.
Yeah.
A blender was the only other thing that I could
A
think of.
blender? Oh.
I definitely wasn't going back to just trying to use a hammer though.
Where is this video going? Oh my god.
And I instead used this pipe with a cap on it. I dropped in one of the pieces that failed to blend, and then I smashed it with a smaller
Does
pipe.
this work?
At first, it seemed like it was going to be okay, but it was honestly kind of a nightmare, and I spent the next 5 hours just smashing 2 pipes together.
I thought this was just gonna be a super simple experiment where you just heat up Epsom salt and you get water out of it. And I can't believe he spent this much time trying to get the last drops of water out of the salt. Respect.
So the first thing I'll do is smell it,
Oh, don't smell it.
and it doesn't smell very good. It smells like a weak version of kind of the nasty sulfur stuff that I just cleaned up. It's not horrible, it just kind of smells a bit like stale old water.
Oh god.
So I guess I'll just taste it now.
Why? Why is that necessary?
It kind of just tastes like bad tap water.
I guess it's not unsafe to take magnesium sulfate. It's actually sold as a product over the counter, meant for constipation or bowel cleansing products to prep for colonoscopies. So I hope that Nigel did a good job extracting the water so that it's pure. Otherwise, he might get some mild diarrhea the next day. Alright, on to the next video, which is the one that I'm honestly a little bit scared to watch, called Turning My Pee into Medicine.
For this video, I'll be making phenytoin, which is an anti-seizure medication. It's often sold under the brand name Dilantin, and it's also used to treat other things like heart arrhythmias and neuropathic pain.
There are maybe about over 25 anti-seizure medications out there, but the weird thing is, there's not a single study that can show one anti-seizure medication to be more effective than the other. I mean, we're at the age where we can actually implant tiny neural stimulators in the patient's skin so it can send electrical impulses to the brain to stop seizures, but we don't know which anti-seizure medication is the best. But what we do know is that phenytoin is a very common anti-seizure medication. Although many newer drugs are being prescribed more and more now because they have less side effects and have less drug-drug interactions. But because many patients have been prescribed phenytoin and are on it for many years already, and seizure is one of those conditions where it's like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Meaning that the patient's seizure is well controlled on the drug, we typically don't try to change it. So Nigel mentions heart arrhythmias and neuropathic pain. It's not really commonly used for that. Those are off-label indications, and that's because there's really no good evidence for those type of uses.
One of the major benefits of phenytoin is that it can help control seizures, but it doesn't have the sedative effect that some of the other medications can have. It's definitely by no means perfect though, and it has a slew of side effects ranging from nausea to things like liver damage.
Phenytoin is one of those drugs when a doctor or a pharmacist sees it on a patient's medication list, we start to sweat a little bit. Just a little bit. That's because it's one of those drugs that have many bizarre random side effects. So like what Nigel said here, skin rash, confusion and slurred speech. There's something called gingival hypertrophy, which is when the gums start growing very large and it can grow actually outside of the teeth. And these are the common side effects, okay? There are more rare and serious side effects like neuropathy, aplastic anemia, liver failure, lupus. And that's not even the worst. It can interact with just about almost half of the medications out there because it can affect how liver enzymes work, and those enzymes are used to metabolize other drugs as well. So it's a super interesting drug, definitely, but working with it, not that much fun.
What I think's cool is that the entire drug can be built from 2 natural sources, bitter almond oil and urine.
Okay, here we go.
Bitter almond oil is nearly pure benzaldehyde, and I'll be using it directly without any purification. I'll start by reacting it with itself to make something called benzoin, which will then be oxidized to benzyl using nitric acid. For the last step, I'll react it with urea, which I extracted from my own urine in a previous video.
A previous video? So he's done this before?
If you're interested in checking out that honestly pretty gross project, there's a link in the description.
Do I really want to? You guys can let me know in the comment section if you think I should or not.
Anyway, to start things off, I needed to make the catalyst for the reaction, which involved making two solutions. For the first one, I added 0.84 grams of sodium hydroxide to 7 mils of water. It all dissolved with just a bit of mixing, and then I temporarily placed it on the side. For the second one, I added 3.5 grams of thiamine hydrochloride, followed by 8 mils of water.
Ooh, thiamine? That's vitamin B1. That is so cool that it can be used in a chemical reaction as a catalyst. I had no idea. I can't wait to find out how.
Both solutions were put in the freezer, and I took them out when they were around 0°C. With some good stirring, the base solution was slowly added to the thiamine hydrochloride, and a yellow color started to appear. The reaction going on here was between the sodium hydroxide and the thiamine hydrochloride to make just thiamine, which was the active catalyst.
Okay, this is really interesting because we have thiamine hydrochloride, which is what we call vitamin B1, that are in the pharmacy and they are colorless. But I guess when it turns into just thiamine, it turns into a yellow color. Someone who's better at chemistry than me can please confirm in the comments. So I guess just from the color of what's in the beaker, we know that he's made thiamine here.
As I mentioned earlier, bitter almond oil is almost entirely made of benzaldehyde. And under these conditions, in the presence of the thiamine catalyst, two benzaldehyde molecules will condense together to form benzoin. I left it in the water bath for about 90 minutes, and then I took it out and let it cool. As it cooled to room temperature, benzoin slowly crystallized out.
If Nigel just stopped here, he would have made benzoin, which is also a product that people use for medicinal purposes. It's found naturally in the sap of a certain type of tree, and people use it for wound healing, canker sores, and cold sores. I wouldn't recommend it though because there's no evidence for it. There's a study that I thought was really funny. It was comparing using Band-Aid to heal broken skin versus cotton balls soaked in benzoin tincture, and they found that Band-Aids performed better. But if you search it up, you can actually find benzoin tincture and oil sold online.
Okay, so now for the last step, where the benzol is converted to the final phenytoin. To start things off, I just quickly made a concentrated solution of potassium hydroxide by dissolving 3.2 grams in 6 mils of water. I swirled it a bit to get it all to dissolve, and then this was placed on the side for the moment, and I moved on to setting up the reaction. So into the flask, I dumped 2 grams of the benzol that I just made. Then on top of this, I added 0.96 grams of urea.
Okay, so I have no idea how Nigel made the urea from his urine, but I do know that in our own bodies, we convert nitrogen from the food that we take and also in our own muscles into urea through something called the urea cycle, which looks something like this. I mean, you probably saw it coming though, when I bring up a topic that seems innocently simple enough, but that ends up being something that needs a 12-step chart to explain. Like that immunology chart that I made when I talked about Hank Green's lymphoma experience. You can go check that out if you haven't yet. Urea is water soluble, so it can be excreted into the urine. That's why we can find urea both in our blood and in our urine. And it's a pretty useful lab markers that we can use to test for things, like for example, how your kidneys are doing.
On top of this, I poured in 50 mils of 95% ethanol and stirred it for a few minutes for things to dissolve. Then I added the concentrated potassium hydroxide solution that I made like a minute ago. It caused an immediate change in color, and a lot of the stuff that was still undissolved started to disappear. At this point, all my product was in the form of potassium phenytoin, which was soluble in the solution. To get it out, I added dilute hydrochloric acid to convert it to regular phenytoin, which was insoluble.
That's such a good point. So oral tablets or capsules of phenytoin can have both phenytoin sodium or just phenytoin in formulation. But the IV formulation is always phenytoin sodium. And I guess Nigel explained it really well here. It's because phenytoin is not soluble in water. It has to be in the salt form phenytoin sodium. So in clinical use, phenytoin sodium 100 milligrams is equal to phenytoin 92 milligrams. There's a slight difference in there in dosage, so as a pharmacist, we'll have to take that into consideration when switching the patient from one to the other.
The average daily adult dose of this drug is 300 milligrams, so what I have here is about 4 days worth. If I had used all the benzol that I had though, it would have been around 8.
So the starting dose is usually 100 milligrams 3 times a day, and the cost of it is actually quite cheap, at least in Canada, not sure how it is across the border, at around $40 to $50 for a 3-month supply.
Chlorobutanol has some strong antimicrobial properties, and it can kill both bacteria as well as fungus. It's most commonly found as a preservative in eye drops or as the active ingredient in some mouthwashes. However, over the years, its use has become more and more limited because it's not super stable at room temperature and degrades over long-term storage.
So I looked up these 2 products. The first one is an antibacterial mouthwash. It can only be bought as a prescription drug in the US and Canada, and I actually dispense this a lot. It's quite common. It's usually prescribed by dentists, and it's given after dental extractions or other surgeries. You would rinse your mouth twice a day for a couple weeks with this after a procedure to prevent any infections. And the active ingredient in this mouthwash is called chlorhexidine, and the most common brand we have here in America and Canada is called Peridex, which is made by the company called 3M. I also looked up the Roto eye drops, which I think is a really popular eye drop from Japan. But it's definitely not a very good preservative because when it's used in eye drops, it can actually cause toxic, irritant, or hypersensitivity reactions.
There is a related chemical called chloral hydrate, which is also a sedative, but it's not nearly as hard on the liver, and it doesn't cause as many side effects. However, it still is somewhat toxic, and there are other drugs that do a better job, so it's not really prescribed very often.
I'm really surprised that Nigel would actually know all of this, because I've never even seen chlorohydrate being prescribed. So chlorohydrate is a sedative, and it can start working 30 minutes after administration, with a duration of action of about 4 to 6 hours. It's no longer approved in America.
Anyway, even though chlorobutanol isn't used that much anymore, I still thought it could be interesting to make and to test out some of its properties. What I think is interesting is that it's pretty easy to synthesize, and all I need is some acetone, chloroform,
Did he just say chloroform?
and potassium or sodium hydroxide. The chloroform is the hardest ingredient to get,
I bet.
and I actually made it myself in a previous video.
He made it himself?
It's one of my very early videos, and if you're interested in checking it out, there's a link in the description.
Do I dare checking that out? So in medicine, we categorize chloroform as a hydrocarbon, and there's a specific condition called acute hydrocarbon toxicity. It's when someone, accidentally or not, ingest or inhale these type of chemicals. Some other common hydrocarbons are like propane or butane, which can be found super commonly in like furniture polish or lighter fluids. So yeah, these are very common household objects. Essentially, chloroform can be toxic to all parts of the body, but the most important toxicities can happen 1 to the lungs, which can be direct destruction of the airway system, and 2 to the brain, which can cause things like drowsiness, blurred vision, confusion, and 3 to the heart, which can cause heart rate irregularities and even worst case scenario, sudden heart attacks. But for something as serious as chloroform toxicity, the only treatment we can offer is just supportive, and that's basically it, and we would just wait for the patient to hopefully recover.
I start things off by adding 80 milliliters of acetone to a suitable flask. The acetone needs to be cooled to between 0 and 5 degrees Celsius, and to do this, I set up an ice bath. Once it had cooled, I went ahead and added 10 milliliters of chloroform.
Really hope he didn't inhale any of that.
And now it's time to add 2 grams of crushed potassium hydroxide. It's important to add it in small amounts because with each addition, the temperature is going to rise. As more potassium hydroxide is added, the solution slowly gets more and more opaque until it's eventually completely white.
Cool, it turned into this white milky color.
After everything passes through, I wash the flask with a little bit of acetone, and I also clean up the walls of the funnel. Now we need to isolate the chlorobutanol, and to do this, I'm gonna boil off all of the acetone and any unreacted chloroform.
Yeah, we definitely don't want any chloroform left over.
While still hot, everything was dumped into 75 milliliters of ice-cold water.
Cool.
Very quickly, we see something crystallize out, and this is the chlorobutanol.
Chlorobutanol has this camphor-like smell. If you've never smelled camphor, it kind of smells like mothballs, or one of those Tiger Balm products for muscle and joint pain. A lot of people don't like it, but I personally don't mind it. It smells kind of like mentholy to me.
When the vacuum was turned off, the strong minty and camphor-like odor of chlorobutanol became pretty evident.
Nice. I like how he was able to identify what he made just by the smell of it.
Anyway, now I'd like to move on and test the antibacterial and antifungal properties of the chlorobutanol.
That sounds super interesting.
To do this, I just have to set up some simple agar Petri dishes.
This is like doing a high school science experiment where you try to grow bacteria on a Petri dish. Is it Petri dish or Petri dish? Now I'm doubting myself.
I fill each dish about halfway, and then I quickly cover the top. When it reaches room temperature, I'm ready to set up my test. Little microbes are everywhere, so to infect these plates, I really just have to touch them. With the bacterial samples loaded onto the plates, I cover the left one, and I mark it as the control. To the plate on the right, I sprinkle in a whole bunch of chlorobutanol. It took about a week to get to this point, and 2 weeks to get here, which is what I have now.
That looks super gross.
The dish on the left, which is our control, clearly has a whole bunch of stuff growing on it.
I feel like probably in addition to bacteria, there's definitely mold and fungus growing in there as well. So here it looks like the chlorobutanol did a pretty good job. Hello, this is editor Aina here. I went ahead and taken an Epsom salt bath and I said I was going to give you my feedback. It felt good, but it felt just the same as taking a plain hot water bath. I felt more relaxed, my muscle felt less tense, and the wrist pains that I've been struggling with for the past couple of weeks was gone after taking the bath. But that could be true even if I just took a plain hot water bath. Overall, it was not bad. Would recommend. Alright, so this video was super fun to make and I had a lot of fun watching these videos. If there are any other videos that I missed, please don't forget to drop them in the comment section below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe for more contents like this. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!